All right, so in this video, we're going to cover setting up Leadfwd for a team management use case. And the great thing about Leadfwd is it's completely scalable for a team of one or a team of 25. Pick your number, sales professionals of all different types of roles and um, access control. So the application itself operates similarly to a CRM in that regard, in that each user can have their own predefined access to the platform. So if you're a BDR, you might just be prospecting, while a VP of sales is setting up sequences, or VP of marketing, depending on the layout of your organization. But there is a hierarchy here. So you can have people that feed sequences, you can have people that build out campaigns or build out sequences and develop content. Um, all of that. So we're going to cover the basics first. And in this first phase, we're going to be looking at inviting your users, setting up roles and permissions for each user, and then handling segmentation of data by individual user using tags and segments. And then also a strategy around sequences and scaling out your sequences to either be shared by multiple team members, and a typical use case is having sequences developed for individual team members. So we'll be using the cloning functionality to easily spin up sequences and then customize them for different members of the team. So the first thing that we're going to dive into is actually inviting your users to the platform and setting up some permissions and roles. And to do that, you're just going to navigate into settings and then to team. So we already have a user that's added to this particular account. So the first thing that you can do before you even invite users is you can, if you need to, create custom roles. And instead of having to configure permissions on a user by user basis, you can go ahead and just add and create a new role, and literally build out as many roles as you want to accommodate the different users that you're going to have in your organization. But just to cover it very quickly, different options that we have is, whether or not a user can create automated workflows, whether they can create sequences, different types of reporting that they could use if they're going to have access to the Chrome extension for managing Leadfwd, managing their contacts, prospecting, LinkedIn automation, all of that good stuff. Whether they're going to have access to the unified inbox to see replies and also reply to messages. There's also different levels for ownership within all these different structures. So whether they should see and have access to all automated workflows or only specific ones. An example would be ones that they create themselves. Same thing when it comes to sequences. So if you are a BDR or you have an SDR that is going to be doing qualifications on or doing any type of outreach to qualify inbound leads, you may only want them to be able to see and access sequences that are actually owned by them or created and assigned to them. Mailbox access, if you have a user that is going to have the capacity to create sequences, then specifically which types of or which mailboxes are they allowed to assign to a sequence for outreach. And then everything else is pretty self-explanatory. But the good thing about creating a role is if you're going to have custom permissions for one unique type of role within your organization, instead of having to go and customize this set of permissions for every single user, you can create it once and then assign it to the user. So to actually bring folks into your organization, you just go to invite users. You can type one or many users to invite at one time, assign them a role. So if you had a custom role that you had already created, that would be showing in this particular set of in this menu. And if you want to group users, you can create groups as well. That's really more of an organization thing within the platform. So you can see, maybe people that are part of Team A, Team B. Again, it all depends on how your organization is actually set up, your sales org or your marketing department. So that can be useful. Assign engage mailbox just means that they will have access to connect mailboxes. Typically, we see this as more of an admin function, but if you want them to be able to access mailboxes and tweak those settings, then you would want to enable that as well. Now, at any time, if you assign someone a role, but you need to extend permissions or make a change, you can do that for any user as well. As you can see here, so you can just come in and make any of the modifications, either adding permission or removing permission, and then save it, and then it becomes a custom permission automatically. So it's pretty lightweight in terms of managing your users even after they're created. And as we add more features and functionality to the platform, new access permissions could come up that you'd want to update. So whether you're updating that in a role or updating it on a user by user basis, you have two different options there. Now, when it comes to data, and if you have a team that is either going to be reaching out to contact data or creating contact data, you'll want to figure out a good strategy and a good naming convention so you can identify whose data belongs to whom. And there are a couple different ways of doing that. So the first is to use segmentation. So as an example, let's say we'll get to LinkedIn prospecting and bringing in prospects and contacts that way. But let's say you're going to be importing a CSV file with prospects to add into a specific sequence for a member of your team. So what you'll want to do is I would recommend naming the CSV file that you're going to be importing after the user in particular, so it's easy to see. Because what ends up happening is when you import a CSV into Leadfwd, into your contact database, we actually create a segment automatically based on the name of the CSV. So all the contacts that are inside that particular CSV file are going to be included in a segment automatically. So that group of folks is always going to be easily accessible in that particular segment. So if you name it after your user, and that becomes part of the segment name, then it'll be very easy to pick out in the future. The second thing that you can do in that same vein is to create a system of tagging, so that you can tag your contact records with a naming convention. So if you're, just as an example, if your user's name is John Doe, then adding a tag to every record that belongs to John Doe would make it a very easy way for you then, for example, from the contact manager to easily sort by tags. But again, you'll also be able to support by segment and filter by different segments too. So those would be the two components that I would use in the platform for at least setting data ownership. And it's a little bit easier inside the extension as well. So if your team is going to be prospecting and you have your team member getting ready to drop some profiles from LinkedIn into Leadfwd and into a sequence, they can actually do this as part of the export process as well. So they would be able to, after they select the contact database, they'd be able to add all those folks into a segment. So that could easily be their own. So go with John Doe. But if this segment already existed, then in this case, John would be able to select his segment. So anything coming over from LinkedIn would automatically be added to John's segment. Same with tagging. So if you wanted to do John Doe, just the name, no spaces for future filtering. We have tags. Tag filtering is part of a lot of different reports in the application. So you could drill down and look at performance just based on, for example, contacts that have been tagged with John Doe. So it becomes a very easy way throughout the application to sift and filter through data based on your individual user. Other ideas for tags as well. Sometimes having a tag for the date is good if you're ever looking for prospects that came in either on a specific day or maybe a specific month. You can add as many tags as you want, but they do become a very universal tool for drilling into your data to find specific types of records. And then on sequences, that's the next piece. Really, when it comes to organizing, when you have multiple team members, you can't always push them into the same sequence. So before we get to that, I want to show you with our mailboxes, you can set ownership of mailboxes and create groups as well using tags. So this is something. So after you create your users, then I would recommend moving into connecting your mailboxes. because at that point, what you can do is set ownership of mailboxes based on adding tags. So in this case, we have Kevin, but if we wanted to add John Doe, so if you had, let's say, 15 mailboxes for 3 team members, 5 mailboxes each. Then through, like, you can take your first group of 5 and assign those to John Doe. Next group of 5, assign those to Sally Jones. Next group of 5 to make up the final 15 could be assigned to, Sam Waters. So whatever the particular name is of your users. But what this does is then it creates a group that you can easily assign to sequences that belong to each of those team members, which I'll show you now. And this is going to save you a lot of time, because especially as you start scaling out and you have more mailboxes. So the first thing we'll get to, and I'm just going to show you this quickly. So when you go into your sequence configuration and you select Smart Sender Rotation, which is just inbox rotation, then you would select mailboxes by tag. So in this case, I selected Kevin. I only have 1 mailbox, but if we went with John Doe, and then his 5 mailboxes would show up. So it becomes a one-click and done proposition for scaling out, setting up your sequence to scale with just mailboxes that belong to a specific user. Now, while we're also here, in terms of how you're going to separate out sequences, so a couple different things that you're going to see here. One, you can, from the sequence manager, this is pretty light, but it's not uncommon to have 100 and 150 sequences that are all in here. So how do you actually go through and figure out what's what? So the first thing is you can always filter by owner of a sequence. You can filter by tags that are assigned to a sequence. Sound familiar? We just talked about tags for contacts, but we're going to talk about tags for sequences as well. And then also filter by purpose. So you can assign a purpose to a sequence, and you can actually also create custom purposes as well. So generally, you can handle organization just with the owner and tags, but purpose can be useful if you're going to have different departments doing different things. So if the marketing department's going to have their own types of sequences, if team members in your sales team, or SDRs, for example, that are handling inbound leads and qualifying them or trying to reactivate them, that might be a different purpose. And even if you have a CS team that's doing, some type of customer support outreach at scale, and they're using this, then you may want to use purposes for that as well. So I generally see purposes either a very specific type of sequence, cold outbound, for example, or a department. And again, all of this is just to make it easy for you to quickly, drill down into your sequences and get to where you want to go if you have a lot of sequences going at one time. Naming conventions for your sequence will become very important too, as will the clone function. So when you clone a sequence, it makes an exact duplicate of it, and then you can go in, make your tweaks, edit it, and fire it up. Obviously the idea is that you don't want to have to keep creating sequences from scratch, especially when you have sequences that are working and you just want to scale them out to different team members to be able to use. Then this is the most ideal way of doing that. So if we take, this sequence, for example, we'll just clone it. And as you can see, like I generally like to use the user's name to start off the sequence, just to make it simple to see it. And then what we would do for adding tags and assigning purpose in the configuration, first off, we may want to change the owner. So if, let's say this is John Doe and not instead of Kevin, but this is John Doe's sequence, then we would set this to John Doe, or whomever the owner is supposed to be after we clone it. As the administrator or the account owner, you're always going to be able to see everything. And then this kind of loops back to user permissions as well, right? So if the setting for Kevin was that Kevin can only view sequences that he's the owner of, then assigning the owner becomes important in that situation as well. Sequence purpose, like I said, these are just defaults, but you can add more. But the really important thing is going to be owner, and then also tagging. So I want to just tag John Doe. And the reason I like adding a tag in addition to having the ownership is really just about for all the other reporting and analytics that exist in the platform, because all of those have filters, not just by owner, but by tags too. So it's just another metric for you to easily, use to basically find and assign ownership. Now, as you're cloning out sequences for different members of your team, so we covered the assignment of mailboxes by tag and basically creating a group of mailboxes that belong to John and Sally and Sam. So as you, the account owner, are spinning up and creating these sequences and setting them up for different members of your team, is you can see why they can't necessarily be shared by multiple team members, because John's going to have his set of mailboxes, and those mailboxes are going to have from names that match John. And if John's doing LinkedIn automation and LinkedIn prospecting, then his LinkedIn profile name should also match there. And the idea is just so everything is uniform, from prospecting to outreach. Everything's coming from John. So, and you also want to be able to track John's performance and output on a sequence basis, separate from Sally and Sam and everyone else on your team. Now, when it comes to, again, tweaking these things for different team members, tasks, it becomes important to make sure you always remember to edit them, because tasks, which power LinkedIn engagement, or if you have an outbound calling manual task that you want your team to take, you want to be able to assign these tasks appropriately. So again, let's pretend Kevin is John. So Kevin here now, as this sequence runs, since he's the owner and this is for him, when this call task gets scheduled for prospects that are making their way through the sequence, then this task is going to show up in Kevin's Chrome extension under tasks, and not under Sally's and not under Sam's. So you always want to make sure that you update the task ownership as well, so it gets assigned appropriately. Now, when you go and you set up Sally or Sam sequences, you do the same thing. You would select Sam or Sally here, and same with their mailboxes, same with the ownership, all of that. Now, another important key for this, particularly around user access. So within the permissions, you want to grant your team access to the Chrome extension, and your team is then going to have to download the Chrome extension and generate their auth key and secret to authenticate their Chrome extension. This is basically just the username and password. So when they generate the key using the generate button, right now it's revoked, but it would say generate. The auth key will be emailed to them, to the mailbox that they use to create their account when they're invited, and then the auth secret here they can just copy. So they'll have to go through this. So I mean, in terms of like an overall setup process, once you invite your users, you'll want to let them know to go in and perform this step, and you can use our help article to guide them on that. But once they download the extension, there's also a video right within the extension setup view that they can watch, just to know that they had to log in and go to their login info and grab this data. So once everyone is set up, they have the extension set up, and then you as the account owner are starting to build out sequences. At that point, I'd say they can start getting acclimated with prospecting on LinkedIn, getting familiar with the different views that you can extract profiles from, filtering them down, and starting to do some soft exports with their own segments created for ownership, and then tagging their records. And then once you have sequences set up, then you can get into actually moving those prospects that they've already potentially brought in just as test cases into sequences, but then also filling in those sequences and adding and enrolling contacts right from LinkedIn live, and then pushing them into sequences once the sequences are launched. So that's the second, that would be phase two in terms of starting to stand up the outbound. This video is really focused on that initial setup. Now, let's say that you are in a situation where you have multiple departments that you want to have completely separate from one another, or different brands or different sub-entities. Basically, any situation where you need to have a completely separate workspace with separate data, separate users potentially, for managing outreach in separate sequences. So workspaces would be what you'd want to use for that. And a workspace is basically a derivative account that shares resources from your main account. So your contacts, your email finder credits, all of that would be shared with the any of the different workspaces. But the value of the workspaces is they're completely separate and they have their own data. So all you do, so you can spin up a workspace very easily. It's just like creating an account. You pick a master username, password, and then boom, there you go. You got your workspace. So one of the great advantages of the workspace is, even though you can create a username and password, or you do, as the account owner, you have seamless one-click access to move in and out of your workspaces. So that's part one. Now, again, look at this. Okay, so this is a completely separate workspace. It's a completely unique account. It has its own contact setup, the whole 9 yards, and its own users as well. So if you have some users that, let's say, are going to be using the primary account, but they're also going to be maybe prospecting and doing outreach for one of your different departments or one of your different brands, whatever the case may be, then you would invite them in. You would invite those users into this particular workspace as well, and you basically would follow the same steps as you did in earlier in the video in terms of the roles, the permissions, the setup, all of that. It's all the same. This is just now a different workspace for them to operate out of. And what will become handy for them is if they're using our Chrome extension, and let's say you have 2 or 3 different workspaces set up, we also have workspaces inside the Chrome extension. And basically, the user would be able to, they would have separate auth keys and secrets for their different workspaces. Okay, so they are unique accounts again. But instead of having, to have to like log in and log out within their Chrome extension to hop between accounts, they can just set up different workspaces. So in this example, these are all different workspace accounts that exist inside my single Chrome extension. And the great thing about that is it's one click, and now I'm moving into a completely different account inside. And you can see the prospects that I have, that have been extracted from LinkedIn. This is all unique to this workspace. My tasks are unique to this workspace. Everything about it is completely unique to the individual workspace that I'm connected to. So that's just one click and the move. So, and then adding the workspace is just as simple as, creating a new workspace with a new key and secrets, naming it so they can pick it out easily, adding their auth key, all that, and then saving it, and then it will appear under the workspace. So this is handy if, again, you're going to have your, let's say, a core team of BDRs are going to be prospecting for multiple brands, but you want to have that data segmentation, you want to have the sequence segmentation. Then they can easily, hop in between, even on their same LinkedIn account, but just keep all their prospecting efforts completely separate, easily organized and managed. You won't have overlap and any confusion with your prospect data. And it's, very handy. So the workspace, again, it's slightly different than the workspaces inside the account itself. And there is a little legwork in getting the setup because they will need to go in and, again, generate their auth key, auth secret, for sidebar, and then run the setup. But once everything is set up, it saves a ton of time because it's one click to toggle between different accounts, manage their prospecting efforts for again, different brands, different business units, all without really having to do much of anything except 2 clicks and moving around a bit. Okay, so that's pretty much what we want to cover in terms of the initial setup for a team environment. Obviously, there's a lot more we can get into in terms of some of the functional components of this, like sequences and building those out. We'll make that a phase 2 video. But this is more the foundational setup and getting ready for having a team using Leadfwd, but much more to come.